She was absolutely certain she was alone. That certainty had been expensive, paid for with money, planning, and the kind of control only a woman at the top of her world could afford. The private penthouse spa occupied the highest floor of the building, reserved under her personal name, cleared for the entire evening. No staff. No assistants. No security inside. Just silence, steam, and the rare luxury of letting her shoulders finally drop. For once, she wasn't a billionaire CEO, a boardroom predator, a headline name whispered with envy or resentment. For once, she was simply a woman breathing. The water moved slowly around her, warm and weightless, carrying away the ache of endless negotiations and sleepless flights. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glowed, millions of lives burning bright and fast, but up here, the world felt paused. Untouchable. Safe. She closed her eyes. For years, privacy had been a myth. Cameras waited outside restaurants. Investors watched every expression. Even silence had expectations attached to it. But here, in this locked, clouded space, she believed she had carved out something sacred. That belief shattered with the softest sound imaginable. A click. Barely audible. Almost dismissible. Her eyes opened. At first, she told herself it was nothing. The building made noises. Pipes whispered. Elevators hummed. But then came the second sound, clearer this time. A door opening where no door should have been opened. Her heart stuttered. She lifted her head slightly, listening. The steam blurred the far end of the room, turning everything into pale shadows and glassy shapes. She couldn't see clearly, but she could feel it now, that instinctive tightening in the chest that no amount of wealth ever truly erased. Someone was there. Her first emotion wasn't fear. It was disbelief. This was impossible. She had signed the papers herself. She had confirmed twice. She had demanded absolute solitude because tonight wasn't about luxury, it was about survival. About holding herself together after weeks of pressure that had nearly broken her. And yet, footsteps. Real ones. Human ones. They stopped abruptly, as if whoever had entered had just realized the same terrible truth she had. The silence that followed was heavier than the steam. Then she heard a sharp intake of breath. A man's breath. She turned. Through the fog, a figure stood frozen near the doorway. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Completely motionless, like a man caught in the act of trespassing into someone else's life. He hadn't moved forward. Hadn't spoken. Hadn't even tried to leave yet, as if his body hadn't caught up to his mind. Their eyes met. Shock was written across his face so clearly that it stunned her into stillness. This was no intruder with intent. No arrogant opportunist. This was raw, unfiltered panic. Oh, he started, then stopped, the word collapsing under the weight of the moment. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct screamed to cover herself, to demand answers, to reclaim control. But something strange happened instead. She noticed his hands. They were clenched at his sides, knuckles white, as though he were physically restraining himself from doing anything wrong. His gaze snapped downward immediately, fixed firmly on the tiled floor. His voice cracked. He swallowed. I'm so sorry. I was told this area was empty. She searched him in that split second where judgments are formed and destinies quietly tilt. He didn't look like someone who belonged in this world of polished marble and whispered exclusivity. His clothes were simple. Clean but worn. The kind of man who measured his days and responsibilities, not indulgences. And there was something else, something unmistakable. Exhaustion. Not the curated exhaustion of power, but the deep, bone-heavy tiredness of someone who carried more than anyone noticed. I can leave, he said quickly, already stepping backward. I didn't mean to, this was a mistake. Her breath finally came back to her. Wait. The words slipped out before she decided to say it. He stopped instantly, like a man afraid that any movement might make things worse. She hated how exposed she felt, not just physically, but emotionally. How this accidental intrusion had cracked open a moment she'd guarded fiercely. Anger flared, sharp and instinctive. How did you get access? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. I was given the wrong keycard, he said immediately. Front desk mix-up. I was supposed to meet someone from maintenance about a leak in my apartment below. They told me to check here because they thought no one had booked it tonight. He winced. Clearly, that was wrong. The silence stretched again. She studied him more carefully now. Early 40s, maybe? Lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of too many nights awake. His posture was apologetic, protective even, like someone used to minimizing himself to avoid conflict. He didn't look again. Not once. That mattered more than she expected. Most men, especially those who knew who she was, looked too long. With curiosity. With entitlement. With calculation. This man looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Her heartbeat slowed. You can turn around, she said quietly. I'll handle this. He turned so fast he nearly stumbled, facing the wall like a chastened schoolboy. I swear I didn't see. I saw that someone was here, obviously, but I'm not. It's fine. She cut in, surprised by her own calm. Was it fine? No. It was chaotic, uncomfortable, absurd. And yet, beneath all of that, something unexpected stirred, an odd sense of control returning, not through power, but through choice. She stepped out of the water, wrapping herself in a towel, her movements slow and deliberate. Not to entice. Not to perform. Simply to reclaim herself. You can go, she said once she was covered. I'll speak to the front desk. Yes. Of course. He nodded, still facing the wall. Again, I'm really sorry. He took a step toward the door, then hesitated. For what it's worth, he added softly, this wasn't disrespect. Just bad timing. She almost laughed. When the door finally closed behind him, the room felt different. Not violated, but altered. As if something invisible had been rearranged. She sank onto the bench, towel clutched tightly, steam curling around her once more. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, composed, powerful, untouched. And yet her hands were trembling. Because for the first time in years, someone had seen her without wanting anything from her. Not her money. Not her name. Not her body. Just a human being caught off guard, doing his best not to cross a line. She exhaled slowly. She had come here to be alone. Instead, she had just crossed paths with a stranger who would refuse to leave her thoughts, long after the steam cleared and the city lights dimmed. The door should have been the end of it. That was what she told herself as the quiet returned, thick and uncertain, settling into the corners of the spa like a question that refused to be answered. The steam still floated, the water still hummed softly, and the city beyond the glass still glittered as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Yet something had shifted. The solitude she had protected so fiercely now felt incomplete, like a sentence cut off mid-thought. She wrapped the towel tighter around herself, not because she was cold, but because she needed something solid to hold on to. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored wall, hair damp, face bare, eyes sharper than she remembered. This was the version of herself no magazine ever captured. No armor. No rehearsed expressions. Just a woman who had been seen unexpectedly, and not diminished by it. She stood there longer than she meant to, listening to her own breathing, replaying the moment in her mind. The way he had frozen. The way his eyes had dropped instantly. The way his voice had carried embarrassment instead of hunger, panic instead of entitlement. It unsettled her more than if he had been arrogant. Finally, she reached for her robe and stepped out of the spa area. As she moved through the private hallway toward the changing room, irritation began to rise, not at him, but at the system that had failed her. She would call the front desk. She would demand an explanation. This building prided itself on perfection, and tonight perfection had cracked. She was halfway through dressing when a quiet knock echoed through the space. She froze. No one knocked here. No one ever knocked. Her first instinct was anger. Her second was caution. She slipped the robe back on, tied it firmly, and walked toward the door with measured steps. Yes? She called, keeping her voice cool. It's me, came the answer, hesitant. The man from before. I spoke to the front desk. They asked me to come back and explain what happened to you. She closed her eyes briefly. Of course they did. She opened the door just enough to see him. He stood a careful distance away, hands clasped in front of him like someone waiting outside a principal's office. His jacket was slung over one arm, as if he'd been preparing to leave the building entirely. I told them it was my mistake, he said quickly. That I misunderstood the instructions. I didn't want this to be uncomfortable for you. She studied him again, this time without steam or surprise blurring the picture. He looked even more out of place now, surrounded by polished stone and subtle lighting, a man who belonged to simpler spaces. But there was a steadiness to him that made her pause. Come in, she said after a moment. His eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? Yes, she replied. We should clear it up properly. He stepped inside, careful to keep his gaze level and respectful. The door closed behind him, sealing them into the same space again, but this time, the shock was gone. What remained was something quieter, heavier. I'm Daniel, he said. By the way. She hesitated, then nodded. Elena. The name landed differently without titles attached. I won't take much of your time, Daniel continued. I live on the floor below. My daughter and I just moved in last month. There was a water issue in our unit, and maintenance told me to check the spa level because the leak might be coming from above. They gave me a temporary card. He let out a breath. I didn't expect anyone to be here. When I realized, I panicked. She believed him. It was unsettling how easily she did. My daughter, she repeated, seizing on the detail. How old? 7, he said, and something softened instantly in his face. She's with my sister tonight. I don't usually leave her unless I have to. Elena nodded slowly. That explained the exhaustion she'd noticed earlier. The careful way he spoke. The sense that his life revolved around someone else's needs. I'll speak to management myself, she said. This shouldn't have happened. I'd appreciate that, he replied. But if it helps, I won't file a complaint. I don't want trouble. She almost smiled at that. Most people in this building look for trouble, she said. Or leverage. He shrugged slightly. I'm not most people. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It felt thoughtful. As if both of them were aware that the situation could have turned into something ugly, and instead had become something strangely human. I should go, he said finally, shifting his weight. Again, I'm sorry. She surprised herself by saying, You don't seem like the type who needs to apologize so much. He laughed quietly, the sound unguarded. Single dad habit. Apologize first. Explain later. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. I understand, she said, though her life had been nothing like his. He moved toward the door, then paused, hand on the handle. For what it's worth, he said, echoing his earlier words. You handled that with a lot of grace. Not everyone would have. She met his eyes. For a second, either of them looked away. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Elena. When the door closed this time, the quiet felt earned. She leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. The tension she'd carried into the spa, the sharp, relentless pressure of her world, had eased in a way no luxury treatment ever had. Not because of relaxation, but because of connection. Brief. Accidental. Real. She finished dressing and left the building soon after, her mind still turning over the encounter. She told herself it was nothing. A moment. A misunderstanding resolved. Yet later that night, lying alone in her vast, immaculate apartment, she found herself wondering about a man on the floor below. About a little girl with a father who apologized too much. About how strange it was that the most grounding moment of her week had come from someone who had nothing to gain from knowing who she was. And somewhere beneath her feet, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, replaying the same meeting for entirely different reasons, wondering how a single wrong step into the wrong room had left him feeling like he just stepped into the beginning of something he couldn't yet name.